Hey, my name is Matt Blois. You're listening to Medically Necessary, a podcast about the healthcare supply chain. On the show, I talk with experts, business leaders, and researchers about how we get drugs, devices, and medical supplies to healthcare providers and patients. This podcast is brought to you by Ryder, the only fully integrated logistics and transportation provider in the industry. Ryder solutions cover the entire supply chain, including warehousing, transportation, logistics, e-commerce fulfillment, and last mile. Discover how Ryder can make you ever better at ryder.com. Today I'm talking with Ranjeet, Banerjee, the CEO of Cold Chain Technologies. The company provides packaging and storage for temperature-sensitive materials in the life sciences industry. Before coming to Cold Chain Technologies, Ranjeet worked as an executive for Becton Dickinson for more than 2 decades. Over the last year, the vaccine rollout has certainly pushed the cold chain into the spotlight, but even before the pandemic, demand for logistics services in the life sciences industry was expected to grow. Recently, Cold Chain Technologies expanded its services. Previously, it focused mostly on providing thermal packaging, but now it provides full end-to-end services, what Ranjeet calls from the manufacturer to the patient. So I wanted to bring Ranjeet on the show today to talk about the growth of the logistics services for life sciences and how the pandemic has affected that trajectory and just what's next for the industry. So Ranjeet, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. To answer your question, life sciences has been growing in a lot of the products that they are developing, the drugs that they're developing require condition monitoring and temperature sensitive shipments and condition monitoring of temperature. Approximately today, about 25-26%, so about a fourth of the drugs today require some kind of temperature monitoring. The interesting thing is, with the launch of biologics, with the launch of personalized medicine and more the large molecule formulations, cell and gene therapy formulations that are happening now, the need for temperature and other condition monitoring is becoming even more acute. As per all projections, I mentioned about 25% of the drugs today need some kind of temperature monitoring. As per projection, that number is going to be a third, almost 30 to 33%, up from 25 in just the next 2 years. So that's a key requirement, key need as life sciences innovates.
Yeah. So that's I think that's a great place to start. That's a good place to sort of set the context, where we are, what's happening right now. And so it sounds like, you said a quarter of drugs right now need temperature control. When they transport, you're looking at maybe a third, 33% of those coming up. And I know your company does a lot of logistics for clinical trials. Am I right about that?
We do, yes.
Yeah, and so I would imagine that when you're looking into the future, a lot of what you're looking at is like, what are the logistics needed for the clinical trials now, and that's a little bit of a preview of what future drugs are going to need in terms of logistics going forward. So I guess what are those clinical trials telling you? Like what sort of needs are pharmaceuticals companies going to have based on what you're seeing in clinical trials?
Both from clinical trial companies who organize and run clinical trials, as well as with our pharma partners, from both we are hearing the need for, I would characterize 2 or 3 key trends. One is the need to early on define what would be the packaging and thermal assurance requirements for the drug. Don't wait till the last point. You got to early on in the innovation process define that, so that by the time the drug comes out, you have a very well defined thermal assurance process identified, designed, and laid out. So early partnership is very important. The second thing is it's pretty complex to make sure that you have an effective design. An effective design balances 2 things: performance and cost, right? So all these companies are looking for, make sure that we have a product that is very well designed, that can deliver on the performance and yet optimize my cost. Now, not every company has that capability to design that kind of packaging. That's kind of where I think our company's core capabilities built over more than 50 years comes into play, of how do you design these packaging to keep the drugs and the pharmaceuticals and the vaccines in a narrow temperature band over a period of time, right? And I'll make one point, and it's very interesting. A lot of people think of these temperature band as kind of, okay, the vaccine is at -70, you don't want it to get warmer. You actually don't want the vaccine to get cooler as well. And it can happen if it's not a well-designed packaging, because you got dry ice and other things, because of phenomenon called sublimation and other physical phenomenons. You can have, temperatures on the other side as well. So the art and science in here is to effectively design and test a packaging that can maintain that band of temperature for clinical trials as well as for pharmaceutical partners.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was talking to somebody else who's at a different cold chain logistics company a while ago, and he put it one way in terms of, that temperature band. He's pointing out that, if you're transporting something in Moscow in the dead of winter, that's a different challenge than transporting something, in Los Angeles in the heat of summer. And they both have their own challenges. And so I think that's really interesting to think about. I wanted to ask about too, though, because you mentioned, you think design is a big focus. You have to think about design early on to come up with a design that's going to work both for the clinical trial and going forward after, if the drug is approved for distribution on that scale. I don't actually know the answer to this question. How much overlap are there? How much overlap is there between the design of packaging from one drug to the next when they need cold chain technology? I mean, is this something where you guys are having to build up new designs from scratch for each new drug, or is there more or less the same technology for each drug?
No, it's a great question. I think rather than go by drug, typically the requirements are what is the band of temperature you need and for how long? And then you also have to factor in exactly what you said is what are going to be some of the shipping lanes. Is this going to be shipped throughout the year? Where is it? So that kind of defines the ambient conditions the shipment will face. Now, this is an interesting point because you could design something that meets the time and temperature band requirements for certain ambient conditions, but that could fail completely in a dramatically different ambient conditions. So the questions we ask is, where all is this going to be shipped? Is this global? Then we'll design this accordingly. And the other thing we have launched is smart packaging, where we can actually give you a design that is different for summer as compared to a design that is different from winter. Why? Because you start getting better performance cost optimization by potentially having two designs as opposed to over designing or under designing.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to backtrack a little bit here because we started getting off into some of the questions that I want to get farther down in the interview, but I want to come back to just sort of something more basic. I mean, you were already talking about like some of the stuff you're hearing that tells you that life sciences companies are gonna need some more support on the logistics side going forward. But I wanted to get a sense of, is that growth you're expecting, is that because there's new types of products that are coming out in the life sciences industry, or is it just an increase in scope? Because you mentioned, there's a quarter of the drugs now need some sort of temperature control. You're expecting that to grow. So it sounds like it's more of a growth in scope rather than, there's some new product that needs a different type of technology. Can you give me a sense of like, of whether you're whether you guys want to expand these services and you're looking at the expansion. Is it about scope, or is it about something new that we didn't have
It's
before?
actually both, Matt. It
Okay.
is to answer your question, there is think of it as there are existing products that are growing, and as they grow, that's the scope that you mentioned. We are, our solutions need to grow with them. There's also the launch of newer products, like, as I mentioned, cell and gene therapy products, more the large molecule formulations. And these are products that require very special condition monitoring and transport, right? So both phenomena are happening, and that is what is driving this growth, disproportionate to the growth of the pharmaceutical market, the need for temperature sensitive packaging and what I call end-to-end thermal assurance, condition monitoring, thermal assurance is becoming more important.
Yeah, and so it's I guess I would follow up on that question too, because there's new drugs that are coming out, but are the new drugs that are coming out, do they require something different than the drugs we had before, or
They
are
do.
they do? Okay, so
Yes.
what's new? What if like the drugs that are in the pipeline? What are the technologies that they're going to need in the future that are not so common right now?
So you're having like if you look at I'll take one example, the cell and gene therapy that is really expanding fast. You need there are drugs that are completely new formulations, but they require some of them require ultra low temperatures. There are drugs that go below -100. COVID vaccine has made -70 well known, but there are drugs that go below -100 as well, all the way even further down. Um, there are also drugs that require beyond temperature condition monitoring. You want to make sure that you are monitoring exposure to light, shock, etc. So there are other needs that are coming, especially with the growth of these new formulations.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's super interesting to think about. Just what's changing and what's growing. Well, and I think that was all. My sense from talking to you and talking to some of these other companies that do this is that that's been a trend that's been ongoing for a while. This company's been watching these gene therapies come through and expecting, okay, like this is going to happen in the future. And then 2020 happened, and cold chain got sort of a bump up in terms of how high profile it is. I think a lot of people heard the term cold chain for the first time last year. Um, so I'm interested to know, you know, how does this sort of existing expansion that logistics companies were expecting for the life sciences industry, how has the vaccine rollout affected all of that? And does it change anything?
I think the vaccine rollout, first of all, has brought to focus exactly like you said, something that was already there as a key need, but has brought a sharp focus on the importance of cold chain, right? So imagine in a simple way, you could formulate and discover the drug, you can make it very well, but if you cannot distribute that effectively, all the good work done up front is lost, right? So the second thing it has brought out is there is a need for companies that have the scale, the innovation bandwidth, the technology to do this well, right? It is complex because it's an interplay of thermal engineering design with logistics sciences and with data and analytics, right? So, as an example, we just launched our data platform where we can now end to end see our products as they move through the entire from plant to patient. We can watch it, right? And we can look at temperature excursion near real time. We can do interventions near real time, right? So I think the exciting thing is that there is a lot of good, I would say, expertise and technologies that companies like ours, like Coaching Technologies, brings. that can effectively address some of the challenges that we see today.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Well, and it seems like like you said, this it's highlighting needs that were already there, and you guys are working in that. So I know you guys have actually been pretty involved in the distribution of some of these vaccines. I guess can you just briefly describe what you guys have done in terms of distributing COVID vaccines, and then I've got a couple other questions about the vaccine
Sure.
distribution after that.
Yeah, so what we did was, I mean, it also goes back into a little bit into the culture of this company, where we said, look, when COVID happened, we said, it's this, beyond the commercial objectives. This is a company with a purpose, with a mission, right? So we have to make sure that since we already play in this field, we do our utmost to combat this pandemic. Right. So we stepped up our efforts within a matter of Matt. I think it was a matter of like 3-4 months. We set up a whole new manufacturing plant in Lebanon, near Nashville in Tennessee, where we already have a plant in Laverne. We are added a new facility just to focus on COVID because we knew that the ramp up would be requirements would be huge, and we don't want to be the bottleneck in the rollout of the vaccination process. So we created a lot of capacity. We are today supporting all of Moderna and all of J&J vaccine in the US. We are also supporting now multiple pharmaceutical companies globally. The global vaccine rollout is not at the same level as the US. US is much further along in the number of doses that have been actually delivered into the arms. But we are supporting this. This is a global problem, and our belief is that you cannot just in a localized manner focus on one country. You got it's like whack-a-mole, right? If you focus on one country, you'll have a problem somewhere else, and so we have to collaborate. We have to create partnerships with governments, with pharma companies, with distributors to really combat this pandemic, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and so I'm also interested in what happens next because, like you said, I mean, obviously the vaccine rollout is a huge task, and you guys are really involved. I think you said you're heavily involved in both the Moderna and the J&J distribution. So the interesting thing is, for the vaccine distribution, this is a vaccine that basically everybody in the world needs. I mean, we need billions and billions of these doses all over the world. Um, and even though there's a lot of growth in the life sciences industry, there's some of these gene therapies that are coming out. There's a bigger and bigger proportion of drugs that are going to require this temperature control, but it's not at the scale of everybody needs a temperature controlled drug all at once. So I guess what happens, like you've built this new facility in Lebanon, Tennessee, I think you said, and scaled up some of your capacity there. What happens, what happens to this capacity once the pandemic dies down? Although I guess there's some questions about boosters and ongoing vaccinations, which could I guess we don't have answers to those questions. But I guess what are you expecting in the future in terms of how this capacity is going to be used? Is this something that as life sciences industry grows, that'll be utilized, or are you hoping for vaccine boosters and things like that? Well, maybe not hoping, but could that play into
Also
it?
another very good question. So our the way we are looking at it is we see the excess capacity that we have built. The primary reason we built excess was to manage the spike like when we say US is going to need about let's say two doses, an average of two doses and one dose, let's say somewhere between 400 to 500 million just to cover the US population, the number of doses. That is not happening in a year. It's happening in a period of 4 or 5 months. So you need capacity to plan for that spike. Now, having said that, to your good point, we believe that part of the capacity will continue to support global rollout. The global rollout, my feeling is, will be longer. We're talking about vaccinating billions of people. We are also looking at moving some of these equipment, once the US requirement comes down, we could potentially move it to our other locations internationally and support our partners there. And we do expect the demand to be coming down, but if we plan this carefully, we could use that surplus capacity to support COVID vaccinations outside the US, which will have a longer, ramp down, as well as take care of the new drugs and biologics that I just spoke about.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's sort of some overlap there because it's true. The global vaccination effort is just by virtue of being so massive, it's just going to take a longer time. There's a lot of countries that haven't really even started that effort yet, and they're going to need some help. So there's that to think about, and then like you're saying, this industry is growing too, so there's some flexibility there. But
One other thing, Matt, I'll say this, and I actually say this with complete sincerity. We when COVID happened, we didn't think of it as kind of a as what we would think in a normal business decision. A normal business decision is you match demand with capacity, etc., etc. We said no, this is mission critical. We have to have the capacity. We cannot let the cold chain be the bottleneck. And so you know what I mean? It's like this becomes bigger. This is what I call leading with a purpose. You got to do what you got to do, and the commercial objectives become kind of, for this case, they become almost secondary.
yeah, yeah, no, I think that's it's been a wild year, and certainly the way you run a business changes during a pandemic, and so I think that certainly has an effect. I'm also interested in how we talked a little bit about this right before we started the interview off air, but I'm wondering about how the pandemic has changed your customer base. Like, who do you normally work with in terms of customers, and does the pandemic change any of that at all?
So we work with hospital systems, we work with pharma companies, we work with clinical trial companies, like we discussed. We work with distributors. Uh, so I think what I see happening is we are getting a lot more customers globally now that are reaching out to, because our products have been, especially in the US, providing a lot of. We just crossed the 100 million vaccine milestone, where 100 million doses of vaccine since the start of the program have been using a thermal packaging. So a lot of customers have outside the US have seen it. They understand that there is a lot of depth of capabilities cold chain technologies brings. So we're getting a lot more customers outside the US reaching out and asking for help and support. We also are doing technical webinars. Those are completely free, because that's another part of leading with the purpose here is how do we help people when they have questions on the cold chain, and we have a lot of people with deep expertise in our company, having worked here for years and then been in this field, where we do webinars, etc., to explain and answer questions.
Yeah, that's it's funny that you mentioned that. It sounds like part of what you're saying is being a part. The vaccine distribution campaign is so large, and it's all over the world. In some ways, it's really giving you a lot more visibility. And it's funny you say that, because I know that when I looked up your company, I went to the website and watched some of the videos about what you guys are doing. And actually, as soon as I saw there was a video where somebody was carrying one of the thermal shippers that you guys have, the boxes, and I thought, oh wait, I've seen these boxes before. I'd seen pictures of them and videos of them on just news coverage about the coronavirus in general, and it was immediately familiar to me. So I have to imagine that has an impact in terms of visibility and finding customers who need that service. So I just thought that was funny to have that experience of not not being super familiar with the company ahead of time, and then going there and saying, oh, yep, I've seen these products out there. Whereas, I think there's no way that would have happened, 2 years ago. Just
True. Yeah.
different world we're living in. So I think I want to go. I think this is going to be the last question of the interview. This is the way I like to end my newsletter a lot of times. It's basically I talk to readers, or I talk to sources I'm talking to, and I like to give them one wish. There's no holds barred. You can wish for anything. You've got a magic wand, and you get one wish to change the healthcare supply chain in any way you want. What would you do with that wish?
I think learning from the pandemic, I think there is a need for different stakeholders to come together and really collaborate to say, how do we transform the supply chain for drugs, pharmaceuticals, so that a lot of the challenges that we are seeing today go away. Challenges around waste, the challenges around reliability of the cold chain, the being able to be smarter in matching where the need is to with the drug and the vaccine. So I think there's a real momentum and behind the awareness of how important cold chain is. And if that one wish would be, and cold chain technology would be very happy to be part of the team of bringing in stakeholders to let's sit down and figure out what did we learn here. How do we make sure that we transform? And the key word is transform, not incremental improvement. Transform the cold chain so that the next time this happens, we are way ahead, way better prepared, and we didn't. I mean, the cold chain did a decent job this time as well, but we can be even much better and use all that learning for the day-to-day shipments of drugs and pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, that's a super interesting to think about, or a super interesting thing to think about. Just it's almost like practice makes perfect. I mean, like you said, we're shipping hundreds of millions of vaccines, and as more and more drugs require this sort of cold chain technology, whether it needs to be negative 100 degrees or just refrigeration temperatures, it feels like we're definitely learning a lot of things that are just going to make that supply chain more efficient and make it more reliable, and make sure that drugs get to people who need them. So I think that's an interesting perspective. So I think those are the end of the questions that I had wanted to ask you. I also just wanted to just ask if there's anything else you wanted to talk about, or any topic that we didn't bring up yet that you think is super important to talk about when it comes to how the life sciences industry is growing, and how cold chain is going to respond to that, or how the vaccine rollout has affected sort of that trajectory in general. Anything else you wanted to bring up that we haven't talked about yet?
No, I think we covered a lot of the topics. I think the silver lining in this entire pandemic is, to me, every time something like this happens, it's a learning opportunity as well. And I think your last question, I like the way you posed it, and I truly believe that let's learn from this, and the learning has to be tied to a transformation that happens through the right stakeholders coming and collaborating. And I mean, as your podcast goes out to a lot of people, if people are interested in talking to cold chain technologies and in this partnership, in this journey, we'd be very happy to do that. And that's one of our ideas as well. How do we bring the right stakeholders together, because this is so important going forward for life sciences.
Yeah. Well, and I certainly think that we've seen a lot of, I think in the pharmaceutical industries in particular, a lot of companies coming together and forming partnerships that maybe they wouldn't have normally, and so things certainly have gotten shaken up a lot more over the last year than it would have happened without the pandemic. So certainly it's changed the world. Great. Well, thank you, Ranjeet, for joining me on the podcast today. This was a super helpful conversation for me. I hope listeners got a lot out of it. So thank you so much. Hope you have a good day.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here. Goodbye.